So Mike, welcome to Wealth Talk. Great to have you on today.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Looking forward to our conversation today around the topic of wealth and joint ventures. So why don't you kick us off by just giving a bit of background as to how you first connected with WealthBuilders?
Yeah, I've got a history over a few years, in particular with Kevin. We've shared a stage a few times, mostly at property meetings, and we've talked around our respective attitudes to wealth building, to both financial assets and to property. So I think it's kind of a relationship that's built from there. I think essentially it's that I share a lot of Kevin's views, I think, on diversification and risk control and so on. So it's just a natural course over a few years, I think.
Great. Now, Mike, some background probably be useful for our listeners in terms of, I guess, your qualification to speak about joint ventures. So would you mind sharing some of that?
Sure, absolutely. I think I'm going to talk a little bit, a bit more broadly. Joint ventures has a particular kind of register in property because there are, it's actively discussed at various meetings. I think there are many ways of seeing joint ventures. If you like, it's the power of more than one. If you think, I work a lot with startups, I coach CEOs, I'm an angel investor as well as being a property investor, and through Builder, which is my current most active area. These are all effectively teams or joint ventures, or I'm a co-founder. So joint ventures permeate many aspects of the things that I do. So I guess in the sense of being a project leader, of being part of a team now, which I co-founded with a group of people. That's essentially a JV. I've worked with property kind of business partners for more than a decade. So I've created a lot of joint ventures, been part of a lot of teams. So that's where I would say my qualifications are. I've been involved in markets and property for more decades than I would like to admit to. So those areas all together, really.
Now, I guess there's a big difference between an informal partnership, which is on a handshake, and something a bit more formal, be it a contract. So what are some of the things that people should be really, understanding when they're going into business with somebody else, Mike?
Well, I think it's really important to understand, if you like, the gravity of it. I think you have to think very carefully about how much you're meshing together your financial futures. You have to think very carefully about the totality of the dare I say it, the downside as well as the upside. I think that there are huge potential upsides in joint ventures, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of risk, but of course you're also to some extent sharing potential profits. I guess because of my large corporate history, I have certain techniques and habits in that I like to bring into joint ventures. So we like to be quite formal around shareholder agreements, around the creation of risk registers. So I think it's very helpful to think in advance about the things that can go wrong as well as the things that we go right. And people, sometimes have a tendency to be optimistic, which is great and positive, but also you have to plan for what might not be optimal as well. So careful attribution of the tasks. You've got to think carefully about how you're setting the thing up, what skills you're bringing to the joint venture. They don't have to be. Sometimes there's an argument for them being similar. If you're two kind of relatively new investors, just numbers can help. It's a lonely kind of process being self-employed on your own, and the rate of failure of startups with a single founder is about double that where there are two, for example. So there's a power in having more than one head thinking around problems. Of course, what you really want to find is a skills base that is complementary, not exactly the same. So sometimes you may find one person who's maybe a little bit more of the practical side, the other one might be more of a planner or a financial type. So a good mix of skills, not complementary, not necessarily exactly the same, I think is important. I would stress also, doing due diligence on people. It's not creepy. It's important to understand the person who's opposite you, and there's various ways of going about that. If people are part of various companies, of course, you can search on Companies House. Many people are part of property networks where you can have a sort of quiet word. If you're thinking of getting involved with someone financially, it's a bit like a marriage. You don't want to go straight in there. You want to have a period where you're getting to know each other and understanding. And in general, I would say don't rush to commit to something, but particularly financially. And sometimes you hear people sort of enter the arena saying, I've got X to invest, and you just kind of hope that they just take time to get their goals right, and also, of course, to understand the goals of the other person. And you need to know what the other person is getting out of it. If you're unclear on that, then that can be a risk. That can be a risk, and also it can lead to a setup that isn't optimal for everybody. One thing you can do, of course, is to set out very carefully what the respective roles and responsibilities around the joint venture are, what each of you expects the other to do. And something that sometimes large corporates do is what we call a DCI matrix, a decide, consult, inform. Now, with a very small team, there may be, maybe it's a little bit formalized to say the difference between decide and consult. But all it says is if it's a D, it means you may have to have the final say on a particular area where you're stronger. But in general, you'll probably discuss everything. But sometimes that can be helpful in knowing, who's supposed to be doing which things. And I personally like to look for a balance of kind of energy and sometimes also, to be frank, money involvement as well. You need to think, does the other person really have skin in the game? Now, in theory, you'd think if someone is looking at upside, they'd fight hard for the upside. Generally, it's a little bit of the fear as well that's valuable. You want someone to be committed to something financially, and then if they've got skin in the game, they're gonna pull out all the stops to ensure that it goes well, or at least doesn't go really badly. So it's important to think through, scenario analysis, risk management. I can talk a lot about those areas a bit more formally, but you want to work through the potential scenarios on which you're basing assumptions. And untested assumptions can be really deadly to projects in general and to JVs in particular.
And are there any common mistakes? I think you've covered a lot there, Mike, but for someone who perhaps is looking at partnering up for the first time, are there common mistakes that you see people rushing into it?
Yeah, there's a few. I think just in general, people being in sometimes too much of a rush to kind of deploy their money. And I see this sometimes. There's a fantastic new boon around the SSAS pension, and I think there's real power in those for people. And you kind of hope people take their time, kind of sample who's out there. Sometimes you hear people say, well, if you've got a good project, the money will come to you. I've got to say that my experience is more that if you're the one with the money to dispense, you will kind of get to see a few projects to take your pick of. So take your time, get to learn what's out there, spend time to find out what makes people tick, to do your due diligence. There will always be another good project out there. Don't assume that it has to be this one, but equally don't be too scared. Grasp the nettle, build slowly from scale, get your habits right, and then build scale. That's what people always say around startups, and the same thing definitely applies to joint ventures. It's a bit, as I said before, it's a bit like a marriage. Get time to know what makes them tick. You can formalize the process around what their goals are. You can use wealth dynamics. You can use DeMartini's approach, where you're looking at 7 areas of life. Find out what their hierarchy of goals are. Most of the people in property who are searching for wealth building will have building wealth very high up there, or they will have wealth as a bridge to something else. If it's something different, you probably need to just nail what it is that they're searching for in that. So I think that's a valuable exercise in getting to know people, maybe in general, but for JV partners in particular, I would stress that it's worth finding out what makes them tick, whether they're kind of me too, or whether they are a useful variant from you. And sometimes just writing down the skill spaces of a team or a JV partnership can be really valuable in understanding what they're bringing to the party.
And in your experiences, Mike, are there any examples where you can share how a joint venture has really helped you in your business life or your property to actually help you build your wealth?
Oh, God, absolutely. I mean, I think I can think of particular kind of long-term property buddies and partners where we've bounced things off each other. It's someone you can share your highs with and your lows with. So when you're feeling, when everything seems to have gone wrong that month, they're the ones telling you about the things that you got right. And then equally, if you ever get a little bit ahead of yourself, you're getting a little bit kind of cocky or something, they're the ones who'll gently bring you back down to earth again. So it can be an emotional bridge and an emotional support. I don't want to name the names, but they're people for me who've been huge supports for me when I've been sort of building up scale. There may be people who've supported you financially sometimes, or just people who've shared bits of knowledge. One critical bit of knowledge is worth literally 7 or 8 figures. I cannot stress too strongly about the value of mixing. I always talk about mindset, knowledge, and network, and mixing 2 sets of those is immensely powerful. It's more than just the sort of the square of it. If you like, it's the cube of it, just with 2 of you. So every time you get involved in a JV, you're tapping into that complete extra sort of mental capacity and reservoir. And if you've ever been part of one of those team exercises, corporate ones, where you take people somewhere to kind of problem solve, the most amazing thing, it's not the people who think they're very clever who end up generating the great ideas. It's they come in from multiple places, and it's the power of a collective intelligence and problem solving that's really valuable. So if I think about specific areas, I think it's just the day-to-day discussing issues, discussing regulatory change, discussing licensing, talking our way around sort of mortgage problems or just tenant stories sometimes, where you feel like you've got so many things going wrong in a product portfolio, and you bounce it around a buddy, and he says, "Well, have you tried this? Have you spoken to them?" Or there are just many examples like that, and just the power of teams to sometimes put you back in your box and sometimes lift you up when things are going a little bit more difficult. So. And hopefully that's specific enough there. I mean, if I think about JVs in particular, I mean, the company we're working on at the moment, Buildu, JVs are absolutely part of our business model. We're out there looking for smaller, newer developers to partner with. We have the corporate experience. What we're looking for is people with sites, people with have an idea of what they can put on them, and we are determined to have an impact on the housing problem in this country. We're looking for lots of small developers to work with, and we're going to specialise to some degree in JVs, at least for the next few years. So we want to personify what JVs are about and to show best practice in those, basically.
And for someone listening now, Mike, they're in a position where they really feel they need to or want to partner up with someone other than attending networking events. Do you have any tips for how you actually go about finding a joint venture partner?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think there's any kind of secret sauce to it. I think it's usually just, I'm a big believer in just kind of letting things flow. I go and just chat to people at meetings. I don't usually go there with a specific agenda. I've got to find 2 funders, or I've got to find one person who's a specialist in groundworks or something. I just find that naturally I get chatting to people, and that works for me. I think in terms of JV partners, you share what you're doing. I'm a big believer in sharing my knowledge, and I share it pretty liberally. I speak a lot. I do a certain amount of media work. So I'm passionate about sharing what I have, and I think that brings people to you naturally. And even if you're very new to property, just sharing what it's like to be new can be valuable to people who've moved on. And I think just the process of sharing, communicating, you almost can't do too much of it. Sure, you may have more to share of value when you're more experienced, but you won't get more experience without talking to people. And it's a phenomenally sociable and generous community. So get out there to one of the meetings and share with people there. And if you have knowledge, formalize the sharing of that knowledge. Write papers, do webinars, all of these good things that you've seen with social media training if you've done that. So share, talk, speak with an honest heart. I think if you go there with an agenda, people kind of pick up on that. So I personally just will always go and just chat and talk and so on. And I find that works for me. You have to be yourself, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that honesty, it pays off, because you never know when you might just exchange a few words, and 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line, that might come back round and that conversation's remembered.
I find that again and again. And the other key thing is there are times when I'm really tired. I'm thinking, do I really want to go spend a couple of hours talking about something that I didn't think I had any interest in? I drag myself down there, and sometimes that's when you most of all find the most incredible contact or the most incredible piece of knowledge. I think all the big turning points of my kind of career and life have kind of happened when I've just said, what the hell? What's the worst thing you could happen, or why not? and you do it and you're energized by something within 45 minutes, and I find I'm generally really glad that I made the effort to go and do that. And people are the source of business. It's a people business. So it's a cliche, but my God, it's true.
I think that sums up the entrepreneur spirit. It's really having that drive to just keep on pushing on, even when things are against you. Yeah. And as you say, that's when those lucky breaks suddenly appear.
But that kind of takes you back again to understanding what the key goals of people are, because if people are driving towards one of their most important goals in life, that's what keeps them going when times are tough. If they're kind of interested but not committed, which I think is a key determinant, the difference between those. If they're really committed, they will go the extra mile. When they're down on their luck, it's kind of almost a persistence. They can't help themselves, keep pushing even when they're tired, and those are the ones who ultimately break through. Because if it was easy, everybody would already have got there. Again, I know people have heard this a million times, but to me, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. So our focus today has been on joint ventures, Mike, but I know that you've been building your wealth in multiple pillars. And for people listening now, just a final word on, obviously, multiple pillars being a position where you have to worry less because you've got recurring income coming in from different angles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's part of the reassurance. It's good practice to be strongly diversified. Even if people are in property, they want to think about multiple strategies, long-term income strategies, short-term trading type strategies. But I'm quite a strong advocate for people not to have all of their wealth in property. There are specifics around property. It's a fabulous asset class. It's highly gearable, but there are times when the property market itself can become a little bit of a wasteland for a period, and that's happened in the past. I'm sure it will happen again in the future. So I like to mix it up with financial assets of various kinds as well as property. I find what I learn in one is of great value to me in the other, and vice versa. I find it puts me in different networks. People in financial asset classes are very interested in sometimes what you're doing in property. But people in property can learn valuable things from what you do in your financial portfolio as well. So I'm pretty active in both, although I have to say my financial strategy is primarily what people call passive, but that's the subject of another whole discussion, I think, about what constitutes passive and active. Passive income, whether property can ever really be passive income, again, is an interesting debate, I think. But diversification, sharing knowledge across asset classes and with other people, absolutely key to that. Do your due diligence. Get your formal processes right. Have a nailed down shareholder agreement. Don't scrimp on professional help. Do not just make use of templates legally. Please get yourself a proper shareholder agreement. Think about the unwinding of a JV legally. It's a legal contract. Contracts are not easily voided. They don't just disappear because they're inconvenient. So think about what you're getting into. Run the risk ideas, talk about the scenario plans B through E if A doesn't work out. All of those are good practices from the financial markets, and they're equally important in property.
That's been very valuable today, Mike. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.